Welcome to the Carnivore Cast, the podcast by carnivores for carnivores. I'm your host, Scott Myslinski, and today we have a very special guest. I'm super excited, but before we dive in, I want to say if you're interested, you can find us on social media. Look up Carnivore Cast on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or YouTube, and also feel free to leave a review of the Carnivore Cast on your favorite podcast app. It helps people find us. So today we have Marisa Rackson. Marisa is my wife. She's carnivore, part of our carnivore family. And today we're doing two carnivores, one mic. So we'll see how this works out in terms of the audio, but we'll be passing the microphone back and forth because as many people know, I am a fan of low tech and I only have one microphone and no mixer. Let's dive right in. So, Marisa, how did you eat before finding carnivore or keto? And what did your health look like growing up? What did you eat then?
Thanks, Scott. Wonderful introduction. Love your introductions. And I'm so happy to be here. So growing up, I ate what my version was of a standard American diet, which was my parents both worked and we had some pocket money for lunch and dinner every day. So lunch and dinner were on your own, and I generally would get a sandwich coming out of the subway, come home and eat the sandwich. As I got older and I thought that it would be easier to manage my health, I was a little bit of a chubby kid. I would try to make my own food, and I thought I was being really healthy when I would make this giant couscous mix. I would once a week make a giant batch of couscous, and then I thought I was being really healthy and health conscious by putting in tofu because it was a lower calorie option, and I'd always find the one that had the highest protein available, but again really low calorie. So I thought that was really smart. In this carb funnel, I would also put in lumps of cheese and craisins because again, I thought that combination was actually pretty healthy, and I ate that for a couple of years growing up. And then every day I had an English muffin with cream cheese. That was my breakfast, and I think that was life growing up. And that was pretty much what I ate. And donuts, a lot of donuts. But other than that, not a lot of sugary access outside of the donuts.
How about ice cream, pizza, candy?
Not as much. My grandpa was a dentist, so even after Halloween, we would dump out our candy bags and have a negotiation with our parents of what candy we got to keep versus give back. I think that it was really just the once in a while donuts where I could not stop myself and I would eat an entire dozen. In fact, in college, we had to do a skit on team dynamics and I played myself and I just sat there eating a box of donuts.
And so it sounds like your nutrition didn't change much between growing up and college. Did it evolve at all, or would you say it's fair to say that you ate pretty similarly until partway through college?
Pretty similarly until through college. I would continue to just try to have what I thought was healthy options. Just like I thought that light tofu made sense. I would try to have more salads and more chicken. But that's what I thought was healthy. And then about halfway through college, one day, a light switch went off in my body and all the things that I was eating and I really enjoyed, I couldn't eat anymore. I started waking up in the middle of the night and feeling incredibly nauseous and sick and just had no clue what was causing it and started to very slowly eliminate different foods from my diet. And as I eliminated more, I found that I felt better and better.
Okay, that's really interesting, and I want to dig in more on that, but I want to slow down a little bit because before that was after we met, right?
Yeah.
So before that, even you started to change your nutrition a bit, right? When we started dating and I was getting you protein bars and things like that, you did make some modifications to your diet, right? What was that like?
Yeah, it was definitely more protein. I mean, meeting you has been one of the things that helped change my entire health trajectory. So at first it was, we discovered Quest bars, and I would eat Quest bars and had so much food reward that we had to put a limit on the number of Quest bars I would eat in a given day. Otherwise, it was way too much fiber, and the limit was 2 bars a day. We learned that the hard way when I had 4 bars one day. We used to have omelets in the morning, and we started having definitely more protein.
Right. And we would cook together a lot and make like, a protein and a vegetable. It was fairly like keto, but you were probably still eating like more of your standard American diet outside of every meal we cooked.
Yeah, there were still more carbs, and there was definitely more like wheat-based products as well. And then also things like, at the time I drank alcohol, and I would have pickles and I'd have cheese, and I wouldn't be thinking at all around the combinations of these foods and how I had them or how they were having an effect on my health. It wasn't on my radar at all.
Right. And so you mentioned all of a sudden something changed. So talk about that. Talk about, had you ever had symptoms like that before? Was this totally brand new? And how did you feel? What were your first reactions?
I think my first reaction, so it happened halfway through college, and it was like a light switch, because one day I woke up and it was the middle of the night, and I was so incredibly nauseous, and I just remember feeling all night incredibly sick and a little bit scared because I didn't know what was causing it. And it would happen every night after night, feeling of sick and nausea and not knowing why it was. And during the day, I was having my English muffin with cream cheese every day, which I'd had, since I was growing up, and started to hear a little bit more about gluten intolerance and thought that could be it. So I started eliminating just like all parts of gluten and started to feel a little bit better. But at the same time, we're seeing doctors, and like physically there was nothing wrong inside. It was just a horrible feeling.
And where did you learn about nutrition and what to eat, both growing up and then, as you were starting to experience these first health issues?
So growing up, again, a lot of takeout.
Where did you learn about nutrition?
Nowhere. It was nutrition. Nutrition wasn't a factor in the conversation. And then in college, I started to learn more from you. And I think that's where, like, I didn't even know how to cook until I met you. Couldn't even cook an egg. Only my couscous tofu scramble. And then once I met you, I started learning more about keto. And I think for one of my first birthdays together, you got us Maria Emmerich's like keto cookbook, and we still have it. That was definitely my first cookbook.
Yeah, awesome. And so what else did you do to try to improve your digestion? You mentioned cutting out the gluten, but what other things were maybe doctors suggesting when you went in, you had these issues? Your mom's a doctor. Did she suggest anything? Did you try like over-the-counter meds or any prescription medications for your digestion?
I don't think so. I think when I did go to doctors, I think at first they called it IBS, and from what I described as the symptoms, and they kind of threw up their hands saying, sorry, I don't know how to help. And I think what happened was that I would eliminate one element of my diet and then feel better for a certain amount of time. So a couple of months, and then something horrible would happen and it would just go downhill. So I spoke about how that one summer I woke up and I was feeling nauseous, and then I tried to cut out all bread products, and that was really hard. It was so hard. I remember we were talking and I'd stop on the staircase and say, does that smell like pasta to you? Do you smell pasta? And you'd be like, Marissa, what are you talking about? I don't smell anything. But in my mind, I was always thinking about these carb sources that I used to have and really relied upon. So it was really challenging, but I did feel a little bit better. And then what would happen is a few months later, something horrible would happen. I would spontaneously get incredibly sick just again. And now I know that it was some sort of flare going on, but what it led to is this utter sense of feeling helplessness. Like, why is this happening with my body? What do I do next? I have no clue. I would go see a doctor and they'd say, I'm sorry, like, I think you just have IBS. Like, there's really nothing more we can do. And what that led to is just eliminating more and more foods, or leading to this feeling of being even scared. Like, there was a time where I was so scared to eat anything because I thought it would make me incredibly sick.
Yeah. And I remember all of those kind of acute periods. They're very frightening, but trying to zoom out a little bit and think more over the years and months, what changes did you make and what did you notice along the way? You mentioned trying to cut out different foods, but as I think back, there was kind of some type of logic and sequence to it. You said first bread. Like, what what would you describe as some of the major changes to your diet, the major step changes along the way?
So the first major change was bread. That was number one. And as I spoke about, it was really hard. Like I would smell boiling water and think pasta. Like that was huge. It was so tempting to go back to it. It was like I was completely addicted to it and I didn't know how to live my life outside of bread. So it took a long time. And then after that, the next big and the next big period of sickness, it would be like other types of refined sugars. So that's where, I would take out bread and I brought in probably like a lot of keto desserts, like a lot of Quest bars, and basically from there realized that that wasn't helping either. And it was still just kind of perpetuating like whatever illness or flares I was having. And then after that, once I'm down, removed a lot of the processed foods or snacks like that. And that was still a lot of fun making those things. We got down to just very plain like meat and vegetables. So very low carb keto and very low sugar keto. And then even from there, I would still have another flare. And that's when we began at the same time you started doing carnivore. And then I made the decision to really drop most vegetables, all vegetables.
Yeah, and one thing I just want to highlight is along the way, there was still a point, there's one step I think you glossed over a little bit when you were keto, but you were still eating certain foods, even before cutting out the vegetables, and you found a few main culprits. Do you remember what those were? And can you talk about those? Because I think it might be helpful for other people to just hear like some of these trigger foods that when we did more research, we found out were really common triggers and negative for a lot of people with Crohn's or IBS or things like that. I think most of it we found out through a couple of vacations. But can you mention what those were?
Yeah, so Scott's helping jog my memory of some components that I've blocked out because of painfulness that I'm sure for folks who've had digestion issue will also sympathize in some fairly embarrassing instances, but basically along the way, there were some experiences that led to what I think of as like the no-no list. So these are either foods that I don't have anymore or really helped me articulate the sequencing of what foods I can have in combination. So it's things like alcohol. Alcohol plus, after one very unfortunate night, alcohol plus cheese plus charcuterie plus pickles. I realized that combination was like a death bomb to my insides. So we started you helped me start articulate and think about foods and sequences like that. So since then, I really haven't had alcohol in the past maybe 3 or 4 years. Would start putting limits on my like weekly cheese intake to 2 ounces, and that's evolved over time, but that was something that came out there. And then any sort of like pickled foods or even processed meats like charcuterie took a break from.
And also spicy foods, right?
Oh yeah, no spicy foods.
And I think one thing that was really huge was Béarnaise sauce, right?
Bordelaise sauce. So it's like a red wine reduction sauce, and it's delicious. And it is absolutely the way that if somebody wanted to poison me, like that's the answer right there. Bordelaise sauce and pickle.
Yeah. Thanks for going into that. I just thought some of those would be helpful for people. But you mentioned that eventually you got to a point where you cut those out. You were still keto. It was pretty much meat and vegetables. And then you started cutting out the vegetables. Why was that? What happened? And how did it work?
So what was so frustrating is it was good for a while, but then every 3 or 4 months I would essentially get a flare where I would be walking outside and all I thought in my mind was I need to know exactly where the nearest bathroom is within a 10-minute walk at any place or point in time. And it was always on my mind. It was always in the forefront because at these moments in time, like I had to know where a bathroom was because I was so sick. And it was really hard because I thought I'd eliminated so much. I'd changed so much of my diet from like the couscous and tofu days and craisins. And now I'm at a point where I wouldn't dare thinking of eating any of those things, but I'm still getting incredibly sick. And that's what helped tip the decision over to removing like all vegetables. Because at the same time, I think you helped me introduce some research around like oxalates. and how certain plant matters with oxalates may be really painful. I think one time you described them as like tiny crystals, like destroying your insides. That's definitely how it felt. And that's where I started eliminating all nuts, all vegetables, and really just went down to meat, coffee, and cheese.
Yeah. And there were particular vegetables that I think were triggering for you, like onion, garlic, some of the more brassica vegetables like cauliflower and
Brussels sprouts, all the stuff that I don't dream about it anymore. But just like I went through the pasta phase, like pasta and bread then became this sense of cardboard. Like looking at it, I felt, that's not food anymore. That's something that's going to make me sick and poison, kind of like cardboard. And it was really hard to mentally transition like this new set of foods that I really loved, like Brussels sprouts, into that new compartment similar to bread.
Yeah, understood. And when did you go stricter carnivore, and maybe what were some of the changes you noticed when you did that?
Yeah. So at that point, we're talking like December 2018, and I'd gotten sick again, and it was worse. It was just as bad as it was in the beginning, and I felt horrible, and I was really concerned. And this is where we saw, this is again when I saw a doctor, and I hadn't seen a doctor for a couple of years about this. And she was really concerned. She's a top GI doctor at Tufts here in Boston, and the advice there was basically, we're going to have a colonoscopy because we're concerned that maybe you have some genetic disease and Crohn's. And through that experience, I thought I had Crohn's, and then they reversed the diagnosis. But my mind was pretty made up in that experience. I think if you remember my inflammation marker in that flare,
high sensitivity C-reactive protein.
Yeah, it went up to like 30.
Yeah, 30, and at one point was it even 50 or 30?
It was something where it was like 1,000 times what the normal level was, and I was in so much pain and so concerned. I was like, what's left? I can cut out the caffeine and the dairy, and I did. And then within 3 days, my C-reactive protein went back down to a normal level. And that's where I went carnivore, and that's where it started. I started having a ton of the gains. Physically, my inflammation marker went way down. My mood went way up. I was energetic. I realized how much that even having some of the processed sugars and like the keto sweets were putting me on this like sugar roller coaster where I would have an insulin spike and then crash, and then even I'd be a little bit moody. Scott could always tell if I had a piece of chocolate, because afterwards I'd be a little bit cranky. He's nodding his head. And my body composition also improved. So I started losing a ton of fat and just becoming much more lean, and stopped having hunger cravings. So really stopped having any snacks and just had 2 or 3 meals a day, and really started loving just the meat and water.
Yeah, that's interesting. And, what was kind of your meal pattern like getting into carnivore? What was a day of eating for you on strict carnivore like? Because I think you got into a rhythm with it, right?
Yeah. So I think about it now for carnivore as everything like pre-December 2018 and post-December 2018, that last flare. And what's pretty remarkable is that since December 2018, there's really only been one flare since then. So before that time period, before I went carnivore, I was having some sort of flare every 3 to 4 months, some sense of illness. And then since then, it's really only been one time. And the way that I did that was through consistency. So helping to figure out what's the right volume of food and right mix. So I ended up pretty much like a 1.5 pounds of meat and 2 eggs a day and a little bit of butter and tallow. And I kept that really, really consistently for over a year or so.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. One thing people don't talk about a lot is they'd say, carnivore, eat till you're satisfied, eat as much as you want. But you were going into work every day, and you had to bring your own food, and you had to prep your own food. It's hard. I mean, people say carnivore is so easy, you can do carnivore everywhere, but your typical lunch spot, like a burrito place or a salad place, the meat portions are pathetic. You pay $12, $15, you wait in line for an hour, and then you're not satisfied, and you get cravings, you get hungry later. A lot of people who give carnivore advice make it seem like you're just sitting at home all day and at a moment's notice, you can whip up like a steak and have exactly the amount of meat you want to eat till satiety, but you are going into work every day. And so talk a little bit about like meal prep and how that worked for you.
Yeah. So we have, that's exactly right. And even there's a sense of like, I'd be scared. Like if I went to a restaurant or if we were going to go out, the sense of scared, like, would I be able to get enough food? There was a sense if we went out to dinner with friends, I'd have to like pre-read the menu and see, how am I going to get my protein? Like kind of game plan. How am I going to get my food here? And then once we're there, like, how do I bang it over the head? Like, can I please have a burger with 2 patties? Yes, just the burger patties. No bun. Nothing else. No lettuce, no tomato. I would like a plate with the burger patties, please. I would like 2, please. Is it possible for you to charge me an extra patty and not the price of 2 full burgers? So I'm not paying $30 for this crap, like 8 ounces of ground beef. So that part was hard, and meal prepping made a huge difference to that. So what we would do is prep 2 days of food at a time, which was easy because it's thinking about 3 pounds of meat. And I have an awesome partner who helped make it so much easier. So while I was working late and walking home, you would help like pre-cook my food, and then I'd bring it in batches of Tupperwares. I'd bring like 10 pounds of food into work and keep it in a fridge there for a few days, wash out the Tupperwares, bring it home, rinse and repeat.
Right. And so you're eating 1.5 pounds per day. And how many meals were you eating?
3 meals a day. And then I actually had a problem. I had a lot of challenges at work. There were like delicious snacks. And when I was stressed, I would go and use food as an excuse to have a break. And that's where I'd have like salted nuts. And it took me a long time to mentally make the connection between like food, the sense of emotional eating and stress eating. And even though I was stress eat, I would still eat, and I would eat nuts, and then how it would make me feel. So after I'd have a cup or a quarter cup of nuts, and they'd be like almonds and cashews and be salty and delicious, I could feel my fingers swell, like the rings in my hand. And at this point, I'm just eating meat and water because I'm not eating cheese anymore and I'm not drinking coffee. I could feel myself swell up just from having those. And that's what also helped, like that physical experience helped articulate like what the oxalates were doing.
Yeah. And how about like beef versus other types of meat and eggs versus meat? How did you think about that? Or maybe how did those evolve over time?
So at first I didn't. At first I was just trying to eat 1.5 pounds of meat. And I thought about it as, chicken is equal to beef is equal to turkey, et cetera. And I think at this time we were also engaged. So I was trying to think about losing weight for our wedding and staying fit. And what I realized was that certain types of meat actually didn't correlate with the satiety. So if I had 1 pound of chicken one day for lunch, I was ravenously hungry and would still want more food. And that's where I would end up like having the extra nuts and breaking. But if I had ground beef, I'd be much more satiated and not end up having that break. And then over time, I developed a deeper mix of also including like organ meats and some fish and getting to a really good pattern. So now, for example, I have still 1.5 pounds of meat a day, but I alternate between organ meats and fish every other day. I have like a very clear sense of what I have for lunch, which is ground beef. And when I have leaner ground beef, I have more volume, so I flex up.
Yeah, and these things just take time. I think trying to focus on these minor details for a beginner, someone doing carnivore for the first time, is not a great idea. That's why a lot of people just say like overeat, overcook food. So you don't get to that place where you've not eaten enough and you're in this trap where you don't have food available and you're hungry and the nuts are there or whatever it is for you. And so I think it's great to learn these things about yourself over time and not necessarily copy someone's template. But when you're first starting out, it can be tough to get to know all these things. So you just have to give yourself time. And so how about organ meats? This is interesting. Like you didn't love the taste of liver when you started eating it, right?
I hated it. We would start with U.S. Wellness Meats liverwurst, and it was delicious. And I would take it and fry it in bacon fat. And it was still even more delicious. It was still one of the best things I've ever eaten. But I could not stand like raw liver or liver in its more less refined form than heavily spiced and soaking in bacon fat. And then over time, we tried to basically replicate that with like our liver burgers. So we got a meat grinder, and we would get the liver from our local butcher, and we would grind it up and put it into the ground beef and try to simulate the liverwurst and still cook it in bacon fat. And then after a few more months, I would start to have just the liver, again, cooked in bacon fat. And now today I have very plain liver cooked in tallow and with a little bit of salt. So I've dropped a lot of the spices and a lot of the fats that I used to have it. We just sear it. It's raw in the center. Not at the point where I'd eat it raw, but that's a preference. But I really like it now. In fact, we've had liver that's really tangy, which I like, and then liver that's more mild, and I find myself missing the like tangy, strong liver.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm nodding my head because I went through the same exact evolution. I found liver disgusting and repulsive, even the smell of it. I tried to buy it when I was starting out carnivore in my first year of carnivore. I just couldn't stand it. I could barely eat the U.S. Wellness Meats liverwurst, but it changes over time. And one thing that helps a lot, and that Marisa and I both use, is Optimal Carnivore liver capsules. So just want to give a quick shout out to our show sponsor. Optimal Carnivore makes freeze-dried organ meats. So what's great about them is they have awesome sourcing from New Zealand, grass-fed, grass-finished animals. They have both their organ complex, which is 9 different organs, and they also have just the straight liver. And you can take 6 capsules. It's the same as eating an ounce of raw organ meat from the butcher. And so on days when we don't eat liver, we both consume liver regularly. I consume it raw. Marisa sears it a little bit. But on days we don't, we both still take the Optimal Carnivore capsules. So those are really fantastic, and freeze drying actually maintains a lot of the nutrients, whereas if you overcook organ meats, overcook liver, it's very easy to destroy a lot of those essential nutrients. So if you're interested and you want to support the show, you can find them on Amazon, and you can get 10% off your order by using the code Carnivore10, all lowercase, at checkout. There will be a link in the show notes and also on my website at carnivorecast.com. So back to the topic at hand. One other thing I wanted to ask you about that you had, I'd say, a learning curve with was electrolytes. Can you talk about, what you learned about electrolytes and the importance of them?
Yeah, so at first I completely dismissed it. I remember from the early days you talking about getting salt, having packets. You were raving about these LMNT packets that were super good. And I was like, it's so salty. I don't want to put salt, like drink a cup of salt. You would wake up in the morning and take like a teaspoon of salt. And I was like, I tried it once and think that I gagged from trying it, did not like it, and just wrote it off. But realized over time that as I actually put it into my diet and had it more regularly, that it really helped stop the cravings. And it helps me realize that a lot of times when I thought I was hungry, I was really missing salt and I was really thirsty. It took a long time to make that connection and realize that when my body, what I thought was hunger was actually just craving those electrolytes and craving more water.
Yeah. And I think you've gotten a lot better with that. And especially, do you want to talk about like coming back from the afternoon walk, like the routine you kind of built and the habit you built there?
Yeah. So to Scott's point, like putting it into a habit has helped me so much. So just like at work when I was stressed, I would have lunch, and then my old bad habit was after lunch on my way back in when I was cleaning out my Tupperware, that's where the nuts were. I would just grab quick, small, quarter cup, which turned into a half cup of nuts, and then go back to work. And since we started working from home, which has been a huge blessing in disguise from that point, because I haven't had any salty nuts working from home, I've replaced that with an electrolyte packet. So I come back, still have something salty, and find that I have like no hunger or cravings in the afternoon. What I thought was hunger was really just like my body yearning for more electrolytes.
Yeah, and it helps a ton with energy as well. And so let's have some fun. Let's talk about what are some of your favorite carnivore meals. We get, I'd say, fairly creative, both beef and otherwise, and different cooking methods. What are some things that you really love and get excited about? Things, maybe thinking about the first time you had certain things, like I don't want to give anything away, but I'll let you choose.
There's so many. We are so blessed with our air fryer. I think that was been an absolute game changer. So learning to cook steaks from frozen and putting it into the air fryer and having like a really crispy fat cap on a New York strip steak or a ribeye is absolutely divine. And I think one of the things that I love are what we call like beef yum yums, which are even with a ribeye, we'll cut off some of the fat and leave it in longer. So that way it crisps up and it's just absolutely delicious with a little bit of salt. It tastes like heaven. I think the first time that we had beef marrow bones, I lost it. It was something almost like primal and how delicious it was. And we would roast these marrow bones. I think I'd have to fight you for your share because it was so yummy. And we would save it. And I think at this point we also like didn't really care about overdoing it on the fat. Hadn't made that connection yet about like the amount of stomach acid you need to break down a certain amount of fat. So paid for it a little bit the next day, but it was absolutely delicious.
Yeah. Those are some very fun times. And yeah, we've been blessed to try and sample a ton of different types of meat, cuts of meat. We had a love affair with picanha
and chicken wings. Like it was so good. And what's fun is that a lot of times I think at first it feels like earlier when I was sick and cutting things out, it was about elimination. Like I can't have this anymore. I can't have bread anymore. I can't have zucchini anymore. Like so simple that I remember the day that I pieced together that I can't have raw cucumber anymore because it would make me sick. I was like, another thing added to the no-no list. And I think what's so fun, and you've talked about it, is my mind shift has changed. Like I don't think about that as eliminating anymore. And I don't think about this lifestyle as restrictive because there's so much variety in the types of food you can have, the way you can cook it, the way that you can completely botch it. Like I have botched my fair share of brisket. And it's fun. It is fun.
Yeah. And we also love to go out occasionally, Fogo de Chao, or we have some great barbecue spots here in Boston, and we've done the grand barbecue tour of Austin, Texas, which has been really fun. So how about counting calories? So why did you recently decide to try counting calories, tracking your macros? What did it teach you? And maybe what changed about your results versus the carnivore meal plan? And why do you think that is? We'll take those questions one at a time. So just start with, why did you do it and what did it teach you?
Yeah. So if I think of one of the benefits of going low carb and also on the carnivore diet was my body composition changed dramatically. So I used to be, call it like 130 pounds and like actually have a fair amount of fat. And over the time, over this story, as we've like dropped carbs and increased protein, I probably lost about 10-ish pounds. And my body started recomping entirely. So I think I definitely lost much more fat and gained much more muscle by also like increasing my strength training, like increasing it from 2 times a week to 3 times a week. And then also just focusing more on high intensity strength training. But what I found was that I was hitting more of a plateau with weight loss, and I thought there was an opportunity to have more gains. So that's where I introduced counting calories. I thought, there's nothing more I can eliminate. I'm pretty happy with the volume of food. Actually, at this point, I didn't even think about it in terms of food volume and food satiety. I just thought of, I'm trying to eat and be full. So counting calories, I brought into the mix really to help think about how do I get to a next step of weight loss and what can I learn from it. So we used Chronometer. You were really helpful. I think I did it for 6 months and at first really enjoyed it. So the first part I actually found it to be like pretty liberating because it helps me think about fat as a lever more. Whereas before I really wasn't thinking about it. I thought of 1.5 pounds of ground beef was the same thing as 1.5 pounds of, let's say, chicken, which from before I realized wasn't the case. It helped me realize that, I was still hungry with just chicken. And now I realize why I was still hungry with just chicken because it didn't have enough fat. Versus other mediums. So that was one thing that was really liberating and realized like, oh yes, I can try making my own tallow ice cream and I can have it. Or after a hard day where I had a really big workout, I can make whipped cream from heavy whipping cream. But after a few months, I started to get really tired of it. So I was losing weight. I was losing like the last few pounds. I was getting pretty lean. I'd gotten some comments from my family. Marisa, you're looking kind of lean. What are you doing? You want to eat more? And was just kind of tired. So I know some folks count calories for years. I was really lucky that I just did it for a few months and still had some of these learnings, had some more learnings around food volume and the importance of food volume, and decided to stop and just eat as much volume as I want. But at this point, I was actually still a little bit hesitant. So just as I was, there was a point in time where I was hesitant to eat a cucumber, I was kind of hesitant to eat more food because I was concerned that I would all of a sudden start gaining back the weight, and what would that feel like? And would my set weight go back up to what it was before? But it ended up being all right.
Yeah, and what changed? That I think that's a great learning for people. Especially, I think counting calories can be an educational tool. I think that's the way to put it. It's not something you should expect to do for the rest of your life. If you're a bodybuilder and you're trying to get a certain result, or you're really, really driven, it can be helpful, but most people don't have to count calories long-term, in my opinion, especially if you're eating a more restrictive, healthy whole foods diet. And how about more recently, something else you've tried is food reintroduction. So why have you done that, and what have you learned from it?
So food reintroduction, I'd say overall, it's been a really great experience. It was something I was really nervous to try because when I thought back to it, I was actually really scared to bring not only carbs, but also vegetables back into my diet. Because when I had them, I had gotten really sick, and I don't want to go back there. I've been really grateful that I've been able to reintroduce some foods and haven't felt that way. So why I did it was that you'd help share a lot of research that's saying sometimes it's good to reintroduce carbs. And if you've been without carbs for a long time, it can, for women especially, it may not be beneficial and maybe actually helpful to reintroduce some carbs. And I thought maybe I wanted to see also if my gut had healed enough to try this. So what we started with a plan, and I had an awesome coach and friend in the process, which is Scott. And we mapped out like basically 10 different foods to try, where each food I would take 3 days, and I'd try it in about 3 different forms. I'd take a day off, and I said I would see how I felt. Was I satisfied for it? Did I thought it was good value versus the calories? How did my gut feel? Like, did I feel healthy eating it? And if yes, then I'd reintroduce it and have it more consistently. And if not, then we'd just say we'd part as friends. So we tried that. And I think the first thing we tried with apples, and I was scared. I was really scared because I was like, I haven't had an apple in 3 years. If I eat this, am I going to get sick again? Is it going to trigger some sort of, 2 or 3 week long flare that I'm not sure if I'm going to have to go into the hospital and get medication for to fix? And the good news is that it didn't cause those things. I was really happy. But I remember I took that first bite and it was so sweet. I thought to myself, how is this sweet? How do people eat these things daily? And it's so sweet. And an apple's like 20 grams of carbs. It's like 20 grams of sugar. It's probably the most sugar I had in one sitting in years. And it was really helpful. So we found, again, like some things that are on the good list, some things are on the no-no list. Like we found through it raw tomatoes, a lot of raw foods still. So raw tomatoes, raw pumpkin are on the no list. And I think also when it comes to dairy, it's one of the things I'm still trying to parse out is what dairies can I have and what dairies can't I have. So yogurt, very clear on the no-no list. Whey proteins, I'm actually really scared to try. I don't want to try it because I'm just too scared. And I'd say the other thing that I was scared about was that once I introduced some of these carbs back in, so mushrooms, for example, or apples, or like a small cup of berries, would it re-trigger like a ton of hunger signals and make me just want to eat more? Would I end up gaining a ton of weight because I'm having some sugar? And I'm definitely the type of person that would go all in. If I have a pint of ice cream in front of me, I'm going to eat the whole pint. Like, I'm not eating in moderation in just one serving. And I'm really happy that so far that hasn't really happened.
Yeah, I think it's been really good for you overall. I'm really proud of you for trying it. And earlier you mentioned that you were 130 pounds and you had more body fat. I never, ever thought you were fat, for the record. You were beautiful and your body composition has improved and you're very fit now, but you never looked anywhere close to overweight. And what are some of your favorite, keto or carnivore-ish meals? When we get creative in the kitchen, folks may not know this, but about half of my Instagram posts or more are content from Marisa. She's very creative with taking a lot of pictures and trying different things. And so we get a lot of value out of that. And I think folks, when they comment and respond, are always curious about how we made certain things. So what are some of your favorite meals?
I think most recently we made that chicken cross pizza, and that was epic. It was absolutely delicious. That was when we were trying to reintroduce tomatoes and got a green check mark on tomato paste. So that one was great. Every time we make wings is so much fun. We went through a phase where I think we made like bone broth at least once a month, and we'd make so much of it, and we'd have this it would be an amazing Sunday afternoon activity because we'd have a whole setup to prep everything and roast the bones. In fact, while we would eat for the month prior, anytime we had any meat that had bones in it, I would be obstinate that we had to save the bones. We put them in the freezer. I joke that our freezer is just full of beef bones for the bone broth, and then we'd make it and it smelled amazing, and then we would have a whole bottling conveyor belt, and that's still so much fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been great. I wanted to give folks a chance to hear what it's like to live with Scott the Carnivore. So I have a couple questions about what you thought about me and the diet and starting Carnivore and the podcast and everything. So can you talk a little bit about that? Like, what did you think of my diet when you met me? What did you think of me eating keto? And when I started Carnivore, because we were together before I even started Carnivore.
So the only thing I think of when I think of your diet before keto and carnivore is like literally boiled chicken and salad. Like, because when you were trying to cut weight for rowing, you would boil your chicken. And I thought to myself, this is disgusting. I tried it one time. I cannot believe that you eat boiled chicken and salad without the dressing. So I think carnivore and keto have been really great in making your diet richer. I think as it's evolved over time, it's just been really fun. Like everything you do, you always keep an open mind, but you balance that with a sense of like incredible intensity. So you go all out. So when you were going, when you were cutting for rowing, you went all out. And then when you learned about keto, you'd go all out, and you would do everything you can when you were on cases and traveling as a consultant to have foods to meet your diet. And I always really respected that. Like you wouldn't let your environmental factors limit you. If you were gonna go and be on a plane, you would prep for that. You would either spend the $20 and buy like airport beef jerky, or you'd prepare beforehand and like bring sardines with you. So I always was really impressed with your preparation, and it's definitely been inspirational.
Well, thanks. And why did you encourage me to start the podcast? I think I wouldn't have done it if it weren't for you.
You loved this community. Like you felt so much like you had gotten so much from this community and learned so much, and you saw an opportunity where you'd amassed a lot of like interest and knowledge in the space, but there wasn't yet this outlet, and you were just kind of toying with the idea. And I said, just go do it. Like, the worst thing that happens is you waste an hour of someone's time, but otherwise you're able to add to this community that you've gotten so much from. I think that was the main piece of it. Is it's really hard. What's been really hard, and I think is still hard is like we don't have an in-person connection with a lot of other people in the community, and that over time we've met and made so many friends, been invited to friends' weddings. Congratulations, Doug. We just know through this experience, and most of the interactions are online, and I hope that through Carnivore Cast, it's helped enrich people's lives.
Yeah. So thank you for starting Carnivore Cast and helping me along the way in so many ways. And so folks, that's all we have for today. Thanks so much, Marisa, for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you everyone who's also made this such a rich experience. Every time that Scott interviews someone new, gets a message from someone about how the podcast, the community has improved their lives. I know it means so much to him and so much to us. Like, you know, receiving like a fan artwork. We have this still on our kitchen table of his logo. Somebody hand painted. It's just so amazing and precious. And I think we're so grateful to hear your stories as well as to how keto and carnivore have improved your lives, just as it's improved mine.
Yeah, absolutely. I would totally second all of that. And so thanks so much for listening, everyone. If you liked hearing from Marisa, let us know, give us some encouragement. It took a lot of convincing to get her to come on finally, after almost 2 years. But like I said at the start, leave a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. For more, you can go to www.carnivorecast.com. You can find us on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Just search Carnivore Cast. And until next time, keep it carnivore.